Robinson Crusoe, Chapter 22. Robinson rescues one of their captives from the savages, whom he names Friday, and makes his servant. About a year and a half after I had entertained these notions, and by long musing had, as it were, resolved them all into nothing, for want of an occasion to put them into execution, I was surprised one morning early with seeing no less than 5 canoes all on shore together on my side of the island, and the people who belonged to them all landed and out of my sight. The number of them broke all my measures, for seeing so many and knowing that they always came 4 or 6 or sometimes more in a boat, I could not tell what to think of it, or how to take my measures to attack 20 or 30 men single-handed. So I lay still in my castle, perplexed and discomforted. However, I put myself into all the same postures for an attack that I had formerly provided, and was just ready for action if anything had presented. Having waited a good while, listening to hear if they made any noise, at length, being very impatient, I set my guns at the foot of my ladder and clambered up to the top of the hill, by my 2 stages as usual. Standing so, however, that my head did not appear above the hill, so that they could not perceive me by any means. Here I observed by the help of my perspective glass that they were no less than 30 in number, that they had fire kindled, that they had meat dressed. How they had cooked it I knew not, or what it was, but they were all dancing, in I know not how many barbarous gestures and figures, their own way, round the fire. While I was thus looking at them, I perceived by my perspective 2 miserable wretches dragged from the boats, where it seems they were laid by, and were now brought out for the slaughter. I perceived one of them immediately fell, being knocked down, I suppose, with a club or a wooden sword, for that was their way, and 2 or 3 others were at work immediately, cutting him open for their cookery, while the other victim was left standing by himself, till they should be ready for him. In that very moment, this poor wretch, seeing himself a little at liberty, nature inspired him with hopes of life, and he started away from them, and ran with incredible swiftness along the sands directly toward me. I mean, towards that part of the coast where my habitation was. I was dreadfully frightened, that I must acknowledge, when I perceived him to run my way, and especially when, as I thought, I saw him pursued by the whole body. And now I expected that part of my dream was coming to pass, and that he would certainly take shelter in my grove. But I could not depend by any means upon my dream for the rest of it, viz., that the other savages would not pursue him thither and find him there. However, I kept my station, and my spirits began to recover when I found that there was not above 3 men that followed him. And still more was I encouraged when I found that he outstripped them exceedingly in running, and gained ground of them, so that if he could but hold it for half an hour, I saw easily he would fairly get away from them all. There was between them and my castle the creek, which I mentioned often at the first part of my story, when I landed my cargo out of the ship. And this I saw plainly he must necessarily swim over, or the poor wretch would be taken there. But when the savage escaping came thither, he made nothing of it, though the tide was then up, but plunging in, swam through in about 30 strokes or thereabouts, landed, and ran on with exceeding strength and swiftness. When the 3 persons came to the creek, I found that 2 of them could swim, but the third could not, and that, standing on the other side, he looked at the other, but went no farther, and soon after went softly back, which, as it happened, was very well for him in the main. I observed that the 2 who swam were more than twice as long swimming over the creek as the fellow was that fled from them. It came now very warmly upon my thoughts, and indeed irresistibly, that now was my time to get me a servant, and perhaps a companion or assistant, and that I was called plainly by Providence to save this poor creature's life. I immediately ran down the ladders with all possible expedition, fetched my 2 guns, for they were both at the foot of the ladders, and I observed above, and getting up again, with the same haste to the top of the hill, I crossed toward the sea, and having a very short cut and all downhill, clapped myself in the way between the pursuers and the pursued, hollowing aloud to him that fled, who, looking back, was at first perhaps as much frightened at me as them. And I beckoned with my hand to him to come back, and in the meantime I slowly advanced toward the two that followed. Then, rushing at once upon the foremost, I knocked him down with the stock of my piece. I was loath to fire because I would not have the rest hear, though at that distance it would not have been easily heard, and being out of the sight of the smoke too, they would not have easily known what to make of it. Having knocked this fellow down, the other who pursued with him stopped, as if he had been frightened, and I advanced a pace toward him. But as I came nearer, I perceived presently he had a bow and arrow, and was fitting it to shoot at me. So I was then necessitated to shoot him first, which I did, and killed him at the first shot. The poor savage who fled, but had stopped, though he saw both his enemies fallen and killed, as he thought, yet was so frightened with the fire and noise of my piece that he stood stock still, and neither came forward nor went backward, though he seemed rather inclined to fly still than to come on. I hallooed him again, and made signs to come forward, which he easily understood, and came a little way, then stopped again, then a little farther, and stopped again. And I could then perceive that he stood trembling, as if he had been taken prisoner, and had just been to be killed as his 2 enemies were. I beckoned him again to come to me, and gave him all the signs of encouragement that I could think of. And he came nearer and nearer, kneeling down every 10 or 12 steps in a token of acknowledgment for my saving his life. I smiled at him, and looked pleasantly, and beckoned to him to come still nearer. At length he came to me, and then he kneeled down again, kissed the ground, and laid his head upon the ground, and taking me by the foot, set my foot upon his head. This, it seems, was in token of swearing to be my slave forever. I took him up, and made much of him, and encouraged him all I could. But there was more work to do yet, for I perceived the savage whom I knocked down was not killed, but stunned with the blow, and began to come to himself. So I pointed to him, and showing him the savage that he was not dead, upon this he spoke some words to me, and though I could not understand them, yet I thought they were pleasant to hear. For they were the first sound of a man's voice that I had heard, my own excepted, for above 25 years. And there was no time for such reflections now. The savage who was knocked down recovered himself so far as to sit up upon the ground, and I perceived that my savage began to be afraid. But when I saw that, I presented my other piece at the man, as if I should shoot him. Upon this, my savage, for so I called him now, made a motion to me to lend him my sword, which hung naked in a belt by my side. So I did. He no sooner had it, but he runs to his enemy, and at one blow cut off his head as cleverly. No executioner in Germany could have done it sooner or better, which I thought very strange for one who, I had reason to believe, never saw a sword in his life before, except their own wooden swords. However, it seems, as I learned afterwards, that they made their wooden swords so sharp, so heavy, and the wood is so hard, that they will cut off heads. Even with them, aye, and arms that are at one blow too. When he had done this, he came laughing to me in sign of triumph, and brought me the sword again, and with abundance of gestures which I did not understand, laid it down with the head of the savage that he had killed, just before me. But that which astonished him most was to know how I had killed the other Indian so far off. So, pointing to him, he made signs to me to let him go to him. So I bade him go as well as I could. When he came to him, he stood like one amazed, looking at him, turned him first one side, then t'other, looked at the wound the bullet had made, which it seems was just in his breast, where it made a hole, and no great quantity of blood had followed, but he had bled inwardly, for he was quite dead. He took up his bow and arrows and came back. So I turned to go away and beckoned him to follow me, making signs to him that more might come after them. Upon this, he signed to me that he should bury them with sand, that they might not be seen by the rest if they followed. And so I made signs again to him to do so. He fell to work, and in an instant he had scraped a hole in the sand with his hands big enough to bury the first in, and then dragged him into it, and covered him, and did so also by the other. I believe he had buried them both in a quarter of an hour. They called him away. I carried him, not to my castle, but quite away to my cave on the far side of the island. So I did not let my dream come to pass in that part, viz., that he came into my grove for shelter. And we'll pause here and we'll continue with this story in the next video. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Thank you. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.